There comes a point when a woman, pushed to her absolute edge, doesn't shout. She plans. Sometimes quiet moments hold the deepest truths. A smile can conceal years of betrayal. And sometimes, a woman reaches her breaking point in the most silent way imaginable. What occurs when the person who gave everything decides to reclaim it all? Stay with me until the very end, and please subscribe. Also, share where you are watching from in the comments. They say you rarely notice the precise moment something concludes, especially when it ends softly. A gentle extinguishing, like a candle's final flicker before darkness descends completely. That's exactly how my marriage felt. A prolonged ritual of slow disappearance. My name is Carolyn Whitaker. I am a mother of 2, and a wife at least legally to a man I barely recognize anymore. I reside in a modest, traditional home in a peaceful neighborhood outside Charlotte, North Carolina. The kind of place with perfectly manicured hedges and pleasant neighbors you never truly get to know. From the outside, our life appeared flawless. But the real story, that truth was buried so deeply beneath the silence, even I forgot its origin. It was the first evening of our summer break. We were meant to celebrate. The house was filled with the aroma of my homemade meatloaf. I had even lit candles, just as I did in our early years. Yet, Richard barely glanced up from his phone. When he finally did, he put down his fork, wiped his mouth, and said with a smirk that didn't match his tone, "You're just not fun anymore, Carolyn. I don't even know who I'm married to." He spoke as if commenting on the weather. No anger, no strong feeling, just simple disinterest. The worst part? Our adult children didn't react at all. Daniel offered an awkward laugh, his gaze fixed on sports highlights on his screen. Emily lifted an eyebrow, sipped her drink, then changed the topic to her new Pilates instructor. I sat there in that candlelit kitchen, which I had just cleaned spotless, and realized no one truly saw me anymore. Not really. Later that night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, while Richard snored beside me as if nothing had happened. My mind raced. A whirlwind of unresolved feelings, loud and unsettled. 30 years, 3 full decades. I had given up a career in graphic design to raise our kids, support his career goals, manage our household, and somehow, I had become a mere shadow in my own existence. He used to bring me wildflowers from the corner store when we were young and broke. Now, he barely remembered my birthday. I tried to make excuses. Perhaps he was stressed. Maybe I was the one who had changed. But deep down, a profound unease settled, like a perfect-looking apple hiding decay within. The next morning, he left early for a work meeting, but I saw the text message flash across his screen before he exited the room. A woman's name, followed by a heart symbol. I didn't confront him, not yet. I simply watched, observed, and the more I paid attention, the clearer it became. The growing distance, the subtle deceptions, the way he recoiled when I touched his arm. I began to detect a different scent on his shirt collars, noticed glimpses of unfamiliar jewelry in the laundry, and receipts from expensive meals I hadn't been invited to. I wasn't naive, I was simply weary of pretending I was. But it wasn't just him, it was all of them. My own children saw me as part of the background, a silent fixture, easily overlooked. They only came home when they needed money, guidance, or someone to listen. But not once did they ask how I was truly doing. Not once. So I stopped asking them, too. One evening, after they had all gone to bed, I stood alone in the kitchen. The refrigerator's quiet hum was the only noise. I poured myself a glass of wine, opened an old photo album, and slowly turned through the pages of past years. There we were, smiling, arms around each other, new babies, birthday parties, family road trips, all that life, all those precious memories. But behind every image, I could see the moment it started to diminish. That night, I made a firm decision. If no one would acknowledge my pain, I would ensure they remembered my absence. Not with anger, not with rage, but with the quiet resolve of someone who had nothing left to lose. Because sometimes, when a woman breaks, she doesn't cry out. She strategizes, and I had just begun to plan. I didn't need confirmation. I already knew. Yet, there's a unique sting to betrayal when you witness it firsthand. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I chose to trust my instincts rather than dismiss them. Richard had been more cautious lately, or perhaps just more distant. Either way, something had changed. He was dressing more frequently without me seeing, arriving home late, texting in the garage, and suddenly his cologne smelled excessively strong, as if attempting to conceal something. So I did what I never thought I would do. I checked his coat pocket after he left for work. Not his phone, just his jacket. I told myself I'd feel better if I found nothing. But there it was. A folded receipt from a charming hotel in Asheville. A 2-night stay, a nice upgrade, champagne included. I hadn't visited Asheville in 5 years. The date on the receipt? Last weekend. I sat on the edge of our bed, holding the receipt as if it were a confession. I didn't shed a tear. I didn't scream. I simply stared at it, feeling something within me harden. Not shatter, but solidify. That was the moment I started to disengage. Over the following days, I paid closer attention. When he left for work, I checked our shared digital calendar. He had no appointments listed. When he mentioned an out-of-town meeting, I tracked the GPS history on our shared car, a feature I hadn't even realized was accessible before. He hadn't gone to work. He had driven 2 hours away to meet someone, and not once did he call to check on me. Not once did he even try to offer a believable lie. It was as if I had become so unnoticeable. He forgot I could still perceive things. What wounded me most wasn't the infidelity itself. It was the effortless way he cast me aside, like a worn-out shoe, easily set aside for a new one. There was a time when he couldn't go an hour without holding my hand in public. Now, he couldn't meet my gaze without guilt flashing in his eyes. And my children? Completely unaware, I tried to drop hints. Emily rolled her eyes and said, "Mom, you always overthink things." Daniel told me to relax, that Dad was just stressed. They defended him. They dismissed me, and that was the moment I realized I was utterly, completely alone within my own family. I kept every receipt I found, every suspicious timestamp. I made copies of everything, not out of fury, but out of necessity. I remembered our prenuptial agreement, the one Richard had insisted on when we married. At the time, I had laughed. "You're the one with nothing," I told him. But I signed it anyway. What he didn't recall, or perhaps never truly read, was the clause regarding infidelity. If he ever cheated, I received everything. The house, the savings, the car. He had laughed back then, confident he would never betray me. I never imagined I'd need that clause until now. I began moving like a silent presence through my own home, documenting, recording, observing. I stopped making casual conversation. I stopped preparing his favorite meals. I went to bed early and rose before everyone else. I wasn't angry. I was focused. He noticed a change. One evening, he asked if I was okay. I looked at him for a long, quiet moment. I smiled and lied. "I'm just tired." Tired wasn't even close to the truth. I was exhausted from giving so much of myself for so many years, only to be pushed aside as if I never mattered. The woman he once loved had been replaced by a stranger in his perception. A stranger he didn't bother to rediscover. But that stranger, she was learning to reclaim her identity. And in the quiet space of my hurt, I began envisioning the moment I would finally stop pretending, not in a loud, dramatic scene, no, in a way he would never anticipate. Because men like Richard never expect the quiet ones to depart. They certainly never imagined we would do it with a smile. It happened in the middle of a grocery store. I was standing in an aisle, looking at 2 brands of pasta sauce, one on sale, one not, and suddenly, I wondered, why am I still choosing based on his preferences? He disliked mushrooms, so I always avoided the chunky variety. But I love mushrooms. I have loved them since I was 12. Yet, for 3 decades, I had suppressed even my taste buds for him. That jar of mushroom pasta sauce became my first quiet act of defiance, a small, Unseen rebellion, yet profoundly significant for me. That night, I served it with garlic bread and waited. Richard walked in, loosened his tie, and sat down opposite me without a word. He took a bite, then paused mid-chew. "You know I don't like mushrooms." I smiled. "I know." He stared at me, puzzled, but said nothing further. I watched him eat every single bite. I had already started researching flights. Inexpensive ones, one-way tickets. I chose Cartagena for a specific reason. It looked stunning in pictures, distant enough to make returning difficult, and exotic enough to sound like the kind of self-discovery journey a man like Richard would believe he deserved. A few days later, I proposed the idea over breakfast. "I've been thinking," I began. "Buttering toast I didn't even want. Maybe we should spend some time apart. Just a little space to reflect. You mentioned things felt off. Perhaps some time alone would help." He didn't look up from his phone. "Like a break?" I nodded. "You could go somewhere. Clear your head. I'll stay here. Think things through." He blinked. "You'd be all right with that?" "Of course," I said softly. "I want you to find your happiness again." His eyes brightened in a way I hadn't witnessed in years, not for me, but for the prospect of escape. He didn't ask many questions. That's typical of men who have already emotionally moved on. They don't become suspicious when you start stepping aside. They believe they have triumphed. I maxed out the last of my credit card, purchasing him the cheapest one-way flight I could find. Cartagena, Colombia. Midweek, midday. No travel insurance. I printed a fabricated itinerary. Non-existent hotels. Tours that were never booked. I told him I had arranged it as a gift, that he deserved something wonderful for once. He grinned, like a child with a fresh plaything. What I didn't say, what I wouldn't say, was that I knew he was taking her. I had seen her photo once, by accident. A woman perhaps 10 years younger than me, all high heels and styled hair, with lips too glossy and a laugh that seemed practiced. I had no idea how long it had been happening. But I no longer cared. Let her go with him. Let her witness him snore, deceive, disappear into his phone during dinner. Let her see how charm transforms into condescension after 6 months. Let her see the true man behind his public face. Let her be stranded in a foreign country with the real Richard. And while they packed their summer attire and eagerly awaited the days, I smiled in silence and played the role of the perfect wife. "Are you certain about this?" he asked the night before his flight. "I feel a little guilty going without you." I gently touched his hand. "I truly want this for you." I didn't sleep that night, not from guilt, but from sheer adrenaline. I had never done anything so calculated, so precise, and I knew there was no turning back. The next morning, I drove him to the airport. He kissed my cheek and vowed to return with explanations. I smiled and waved as he headed toward security. Then I turned my phone off, not just airplane mode. Completely powered down, SIM cards removed, every contact blocked, emails redirected to a new address. It felt like cleansing a space of a lingering specter, and for the first time in decades, I felt like I was breathing air that hadn't passed through someone else's lungs. The house was quiet when I returned. No television humming, no doors slamming, no passive-aggressive sighs from across the room, just silence. Not a lonely silence, but a liberating one. I prepared myself tea and sat on the back porch as the sun rose through the trees. Richard was on a plane, chasing what he believed was freedom. Utterly unaware, he was flying directly into a trap of his own making. Let the games commence. There's a profound satisfaction in knowing exactly what's coming and watching someone walk straight into it, completely oblivious. Richard sent one text during his layover, something generic like, "Almost there. Thanks again, sweetheart." That word, sweetheart, made my stomach churn. I didn't reply. I pictured him checking his phone repeatedly, wondering if the network was faulty. By the time he landed in Cartagena, I had already poured myself a glass of wine, propped my feet up, and deactivated every possible way he could reach me. He didn't realize it yet, but his journey had already begun to unravel. I could visualize the entire scenario. Him walking through customs, his usual confidence leading the way, the blazing sun on that expensive shirt he wore for travel, probably imagining how spontaneous and thrilling this trip made him feel, like a man still full of vitality, not just an aging executive deceiving his spouse. But Cartagena wasn't welcoming him with open arms. I had ensured that there was no hotel booking, no city tour, no private car service or spa package. Everything I had arranged was merely a facade, a tapestry of false confirmations and disconnected phone numbers. A beautiful, carefully constructed illusion designed to crumble the moment he tried to rely on it. He didn't call immediately, probably too ashamed to admit nothing was working, or perhaps he still thought it was a technical issue. Maybe he believed he had made a mistake in booking or misread the emails, but by the second day, the messages began arriving faster. "Hey, I think something's wrong with the hotel reservation. Carolyn, can you check the confirmation email? They said they don't have us listed. The tour company never appeared. Can you call from your end?" I read every single message. I watched the dots appear as he typed, paused, deleted. I hadn't blocked him yet. I wanted him to experience the delay, the unseen distance widening with each unanswered attempt. By the third day, the texts became sharper. "Carolyn, this isn't amusing. Where on earth are you? I'm stranded here. You're seriously not going to respond?" And then came the moment I had anticipated. The name. He accidentally included her in a message intended for me. "Maya's really upset. She thinks I lied. Are you seriously doing this? Maya." So that was her name. And she was there with him, likely standing over his shoulder as he frantically tapped out messages, trying to regain control of a situation slipping through his grasp. I imagined her expression when she realized they had no accommodation, that the hotel didn't exist, that their romantic escape had transformed into a logistical nightmare. I pictured the glances exchanged between them, the blame beginning to surface, the fissures growing deeper. He thought he was escaping the monotony of marriage. Instead, I gave him an experience he would never forget. I blocked his number that evening. The next morning, I received an email from a mutual acquaintance, Greg, a former colleague of Richard's. The subject line read, "Can you assist him?" I didn't open it. Let them devise their own rescue strategy. Meanwhile, I packed one suitcase and summoned a taxi. My cruise awaited. A 7-day luxury journey through the Caribbean, all-inclusive, adults only, with a complete schedule of morning yoga and evening jazz. I had booked it months ago, a quiet contingency, a place to go once my plan was set in motion. And the moment I stepped onto that vessel, the burden of many years lifted, like shedding a heavy cloak. I was no longer the woman who waited at home. I was the woman who departed on her own terms, with her own identity, her own thoughts, and her own tranquility. I watched the coastline disappear from the deck and considered Richard. How he must be sweating in that cheap hostel I found for him on a travel site. How Maya must be panicking, realizing she had linked her aspirations to a man who couldn't even secure a vacation without someone else's credit card. Let them struggle. Let them learn. Let them see what happens when the woman you disregarded stops cooperating. And for the first time in years, I laughed. Not because it was humorous, but because I finally had the freedom to. I'm not sure how long he lasted before everything started to collapse. 3 days? 4? From what I eventually pieced together, it didn't take long for the heat, the confusion, and the full weight of consequences to fall squarely on Richard's shoulders. The last message I read before I blocked his number was half panicked, half pleading. He said they were attempting to make it work at a small hostel a few miles from the city center, and that it was less than ideal. I had researched that hostel myself. It had 2 stars, no air conditioning, and numerous reviews mentioning a broken shower and noisy street traffic at night. He never mentioned that part, of course, but I imagined it vividly. No gourmet breakfast, no ocean view, no champagne-filled nights, just 2 people perspiring in a windowless room, each blaming the other more with every passing hour. And while Richard and Maya scrambled to comprehend what had occurred, I ordered a second mimosa by the pool deck and watched the sea sparkle like scattered gems around me. I wasn't seeking retribution. This wasn't revenge. It was education. It was experience. It was a lesson no one had ever believed I'd be brave enough to impart. Some people believe suffering involves screaming, slamming doors, setting things ablaze. Mine was expressed through silence. On the fourth day of my cruise, just before dinner, I overheard a man on his phone arguing in Spanish on the deck behind me. His voice rose, emotional and sharp. Although I didn't understand everything, one word clearly caught my attention: gringa, white woman. It made me wonder if Maya had already departed. And later that evening, I found out she had. The news came from an unexpected source. My daughter, Emily. She texted me while I was halfway through a seafood risotto in the formal dining room. "Dad's been trying to reach you. Something about being stranded. Did you actually send him to Colombia?" I let the message sit for a while before replying. Then I wrote, "I thought a break would do him good." Her response came swiftly. "Mom, he says she left him. He's out of money. He said he's sleeping in some terrible place. You have to at least talk to him." That was the moment I knew Maya had reached her limit. And I felt it. The cold, quiet satisfaction of justice finally unfolding. I never inquired why she left. I didn't care. Perhaps she saw him pleading with friends for money via messaging apps. Maybe he shouted at her one too many times. Perhaps she realized that excitement fades quickly when surrounded by discomfort. Whatever the reason, she was gone. And Richard, he was stranded, disgraced, broke, and alone. I finished my dinner, ordered dessert, and sent one final message before turning off my phone again. He took the trip he requested. I just helped him pack. The ship arrived at a private island the next day. I swam for the first time in years, letting the salt water cleanse my hair, my skin, my clothes. I floated on my back and gazed at the sky with nothing but air and clouds above me. And all I could think was, I was finally free of him. But I wasn't finished yet, because when he returned, if he ever returned, he would learn the final part of this lesson, and it would sting even more than sleeping on a bug-infested hostel bed. It would arrive wrapped in cardboard, sitting on a driveway under a sky indifferent to who you once were, and I would not be there to soften the impact. The ocean possesses a way of purifying things, not just your body, but your spirit. That week at sea was more than a vacation. It was a rebirth. Every morning, I woke with the sun streaming through my cabin's balcony windows, kissed by the salty air and the faint sound of waves gently hitting the ship's side. I stopped setting alarms. I stopped worrying about emails. I stopped wondering what Richard was doing, or how uncomfortable his bed was, or if Maya had truly left him, or merely threatened to. I no longer needed to know because I was finally living in a world where his actions no longer dictated the mood of my day. The first time someone addressed me as ma'am on the ship, I didn't react negatively. Usually, it made me feel old, dismissed. But this time, I embraced it like protective gear. I was no longer shrinking under the passage of time. I was expanding, stretching into a space I had forgotten belonged to me. At the open-air lounge, I met other women, all older than me, some divorced, some widowed, all weary of carrying the unseen burden of everyone else's expectations. We shared drinks and laughter, exchanged stories that were both painful and healing. There was Margaret from Chicago who left her husband after years when she discovered a second phone hidden in their closet. Janine from Oregon, whose daughter stopped speaking to her when she refused to co-sign another credit card. Teresa, a retired nurse who embarked on the cruise alone after her husband passed away and realized she liked herself more than she ever did when he was alive. I didn't reveal everything, but I shared enough. And when I did, none of them gasped. None of them judged. They simply nodded, sipped their drinks, and said, "Good for you." One afternoon, I sat alone on the sun deck, notebook in hand, and created a list titled, "Things I Rediscovered I Loved." Sketching, mornings without stress, cooking for enjoyment, not for approval, walking barefoot on cool floors, evening jazz, mushrooms on pizza. No one ever asks a wife what she misses about her own self. They only inquire about what she misses concerning her husband. But I didn't miss Richard. I missed the woman I used to be before I spent decades transforming into what everyone else required. I began to envision a new existence, not a fantasy, not a radical transformation, just a calmer, more resolute version of myself, one who didn't apologize for occupying space, one who didn't flinch when people seemed disappointed, one who knew precisely where she stood. The cruise docked in Miami on a Sunday. I stepped off the ship with sun-kissed skin, 2 new books in my bag, and no intention of returning to the version of me that always waited by the phone. Back home, the silence felt different. It wasn't empty. It was mine. I brewed coffee in the middle of the afternoon and played old records in the kitchen while unpacking. I opened windows and let the fresh air flow through the rooms like a fresh start. Then I opened the closet and began to pack his belongings, one box at a time, neatly, without animosity, without tears. I folded his shirts as I had countless times before, only this time, I did it for myself. The closet became mine again. I cleared the bathroom cabinets, the garage shelf, the bedside drawers. By nightfall, the house no longer appeared like a home we shared. It looked like a place where someone once resided, and tomorrow, he would return from his lost paradise, from a betrayal that had rebounded on him, and discover what it means to be excluded from a life he never valued. I wasn't angry. I was prepared, because resolution sometimes doesn't come from a confrontation. It comes from a secured door, a garage filled with cardboard containers, and the quiet certainty that you are finally free. The doorbell rang once, a single, solitary chime. I was standing in the kitchen, barefoot, sipping black coffee. I didn't rush. I didn't even react. I walked slowly to the front window, pulled back the curtain just enough, and there he was, Richard. He looked nothing like the man who had departed 2 weeks prior. His shirt was wrinkled and clung to him in damp patches from sweat. His hair, always so meticulously styled, now lay in flat, greasy disarray, and he had dark circles under his eyes so profound they seemed to hold decades, not mere days. He stood in front of a stack of cardboard boxes, 9 of them, every single one packed by my hands, sealed shut, and clearly labeled. Books, winter clothing, office items. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't cruel. It was efficient, practical, conclusive. He rang the bell again, then knocked. "Carolyn," he called out. I didn't answer. He stepped back and looked at the house, our house, the one I had inherited from my parents. The one he persuaded me to refinance, but from which I never removed his name. He moved toward the door again, and knocked harder. "Carolyn, what in the world is going on?" I walked to the door slowly, opened it halfway, and remained behind the screen. I didn't unlock it. I didn't step outside. He blinked. "You packed up the entire house?" "No," I said calmly. "Just your portion of it." His face flushed with a mix of confusion and indignation. "You can't just evict me." I raised an eyebrow. "According to our prenuptial agreement, which you insisted upon, I absolutely can." He opened his mouth, then closed it. He knew I was correct. He simply hadn't expected me to actually act on it, and that was the core issue, wasn't it? He never expected me to do anything significant. "You can't be serious," he said, his voice now rising. "We've been married 30 years. 30 years ago, I believed that meant something." His fists tightened at his sides. I could see the tension spreading into his shoulders. "I lost everything over there. You sent me into a terrible situation. Maya left. The instant things became difficult, I had to beg Greg for money just to get back home. I didn't flinch. I didn't apologize. You said I wasn't fun anymore," I said, my voice steady. "So, I gave you an adventure." He stared at me as if I had struck him. "This isn't fair," he hissed. That word, fair, I almost chuckled. "Fair," I echoed. "Fair is me staying home while you enjoyed another woman. Fair is me supporting this family for decades while you ignored me like a houseplant. Don't speak to me about fairness, Richard." His mouth opened again, then closed. I looked past him at the boxes. I paid for a moving truck. It will be here in an hour. You don't need to come inside. You can't just erase my existence like this. I stepped out from behind the screen, finally unlocking the door, but not inviting him in. Just stepping forward until we were face to face. I'm not erasing you, Richard. I'm just placing you exactly where you belong. He stared at me, something breaking in his eyes. The arrogance was gone, the self-satisfaction, the certainty, all of it dissolved in the hot Carolina sun, and for the first time in a very, very long time, he looked small, helpless, human. He walked slowly to the boxes, touched one, then sat down on the curb like someone who had just realized the world didn't revolve around him after all. I closed the door. I didn't lock it immediately. I stood behind it and listened to the silence, and I felt nothing. Not sorrow, not guilt, not triumph, just peace, and the sound of my own breathing. The kind you only hear when you're finally completely alone in the best possible way. He didn't return the next day, or the day after. I imagine it took some time to find a place to stay. Friends don't readily offer couches when you've cultivated an image of having everything perfectly together, and mistresses don't typically remain when the fantasy shatters, and the real man underneath is stranded, broke, and packed away on a driveway. I watched from the window as the moving truck arrived. The two young men looked bewildered at first, perhaps expecting someone else to greet them, but I handed them the list, pointed to the boxes, and instructed them precisely where to drop them off. A short-term storage unit rented under his name using his social security number, which I still remembered after 30 years of filing taxes together. They asked no questions. They didn't need to. As they drove away, I turned back to the house, my house, and closed the door with a finality I hadn't known I yearned for. It was done, but not for everyone. That evening, my daughter Emily appeared. She didn't knock, simply let herself in as she used to when she was little. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor, and she stood in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed. "What did you do to Dad?" I didn't look up from the sink where I was cleaning a plate. I didn't do anything. He did this to himself. "Come on, Mom. You sent him to Colombia and then turned off your phone." I set the plate down slowly. "You know what's not normal, Emily? Sleeping next to someone for 3 decades and waking up one day to hear that you're dull, that your presence isn't enough, that you've become unseen in your own marriage. That's not normal." She didn't respond, just stared. "And you know what else?" I continued. "He cheated with a woman he brought on a trip I paid for. That's what your father did." Her mouth opened, then closed. She didn't know. Of course, she didn't, because Richard, in all his dramatic accounts, likely omitted that detail. 15 years ago, I added quietly, he did it the first time with someone you used to call Aunt Diane. Emily's eyes widened. "I found out. I stayed for you and Daniel. I remained silent so your childhood wouldn't fall apart." "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because children don't need to bear the burdens of their parents, and because I still believed people could change." But he didn't. She sat down slowly at the kitchen table, suddenly looking like a child again. Her tough exterior softened just a little. "Why now?" "Because I'm finished. Because I finally chose myself." She didn't speak for a long time. Neither of us did. And in that quiet, something shifted. A weight passed between us, heavy and raw, but no longer concealed. The next morning, Daniel called. His tone was harsher, defensive. "You embarrassed him," he said. "He's devastated." "Good," I replied. There was a pause. I didn't know it was that bad. I didn't want you to." I told him the same truth I told Emily. I let it emerge like a long overdue confession, and for once, there was no interruption, no excuses, just silence on the other end of the line. "I'm not asking you to pick sides," I added, "but I won't apologize for choosing mine." And that was the end of it. That weekend, I sold one of the vehicles. His vehicle. The funds went directly into an account I opened solely in my name. I began closing out the shared accounts, modifying insurance policies, updating titles. Every small action was another connection severed. I wasn't rushing. I was reclaiming. People imagine divorce involves anger, shouting matches, dramatic departures, but sometimes it's just a woman with a list, a pen, and a heart no longer willing to wait for someone to recognize her worth. And as I sat on my back porch, sipping coffee while birds dipped low among the trees, I thought, I have never been more unnoticed, and I have never been more powerful. They appeared together, Daniel and Emily, my children, my flesh and blood. They stood on the front porch like a jury summoned to deliver a verdict. Neither looked angry, but they didn't look kind either. Just confused, hurt, uncomfortable in the way people are when a foundational belief crumbles beneath them. I opened the door and waited. Emily spoke first. Her voice was soft, as if unsure whether she should speak at all. Can we talk? I stepped aside. They sat in the living room, where they had once built forts with sofa cushions, where I had gently rocked them both to sleep, where Christmas mornings had burst forth in torn wrapping paper and laughter. Now it was quiet, still, as if even the furniture understood something was different. Daniel rubbed his hands together, staring at the rug. Emily avoided my gaze. He began. We didn't know how bad things had become. I nodded. I know. Why didn't you say anything? Emily asked, her voice cracking. Why did you just pretend everything was fine? Because that's what I was taught to do, I said softly. You keep the family intact, you shield your children from pain, you make it function. I stood by the window, pulling back the curtain slightly. Outside, the neighborhood was still, peaceful, normal. Then I turned around and spoke the words I hadn't uttered aloud to anyone. I knew about your father's first affair 15 years ago. Both of them looked up at once. It was with Diane. You remember her? Aunt Diane, as you used to call her. Emily gasped. Daniel stared at me as if he couldn't grasp the words. I discovered it by chance. He left his email open. There were messages, pictures, a flight schedule. Mom, Emily whispered, covering her mouth. I confronted him. He denied it, then he admitted it. He pleaded, promised it was over, that it had meant nothing. And I believed him. Why? Daniel asked, almost angry. Because you were both still in school. Because we had just refinanced the house. Because the thought of being alone terrified me more than the betrayal. I sat down then. Finally. My knees trembling. Not from agony, but from at last standing in truth after carrying it for so long. I stayed, thinking I could mend it, that I could make him love me again, that if I gave enough time, support, loyalty, it would be worth it. Tears welled in my eyes, but I didn't cry. I watched him withdraw piece by piece until nothing remained of the man I married, just a stranger who interpreted my silence as consent. They were both quiet, absorbing. I'm sorry, I said. Not for what I did to him, but for what I concealed from you. Emily wiped her eyes. Daniel looked away. Then a pause, and Emily whispered, You should have left him back then. I know, I said, but I wasn't prepared. Daniel nodded slowly. So, what now? He asked. You're truly divorcing him? No. The prenup took care of that for me. They looked surprised. He signed it 30 years ago. Infidelity meant he departed with nothing. He thought it was a joke. I didn't. They both leaned back, quiet, and then Emily said something I never expected to hear. I'm proud of you. It came out small, like a secret she was afraid to admit, but it resonated deeply within my spirit. Thank you. She paused. I wish I'd realized it sooner. I didn't want you to. I wanted you to have a happy childhood, even if it cost me mine. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was respectful. They didn't stay long. They left together, arms brushing, walking slower than their usual pace. And when the door closed, I stood in the middle of the house that had once held my entire existence. Now it held something new. The truth. And finally, I wasn't the only one bearing it. The next morning, I stood before the mirror longer than usual, not because I was checking for new lines or wondering if my gray roots were showing, but because for the first time in years, I actually recognized the woman looking back at me. Her eyes were no longer weary. Her shoulders were not slumped. There was something fresh in her expression, something fierce. I had spent most of my adult life looking past myself at the kids, at Richard, at task lists and calendars and dental appointments, at everyone else's requirements. Now, I looked at me. I retrieved a notebook from the kitchen drawer, the one where we used to keep grocery lists and old coupons. I turned to a blank page and wrote 3 words at the top in clear letters. Start over now. And beneath, I made a list. Sell the SUV. Close joint financial accounts. Obtain a P.O. box. Meet with a real estate agent. Find a new residence, not too large, but filled with sunlight. Begin sketching again. Open that online store I always discussed. Each line felt like a tool, unearthing the parts of me that had been buried under 3 decades of postponement. I contacted the bank, the lawyer, the realtor. I listed the SUV online, posted clear photos, and cleaned out the glove compartment. Inside was a half-used parking pass from one of Richard's work trips. I smiled and tossed it into the refuse. That afternoon, I visited the small row of shops downtown, the ones I used to walk past every Saturday, but never entered because Richard disliked small business prices. I bought myself a leather-bound sketch pad. Expensive, luxurious. I didn't hesitate when they tallied the cost. At home, I opened the pad and drew for the first time in years. It wasn't perfect. My hands felt rusty, but it was mine. A landscape, incomplete, but vast, unburdened, like me. When I informed Emily and Daniel I was selling the house, they were stunned. But it's the house we grew up in, Daniel said, eyes wide. It's also the house I metaphorically died in, piece by piece, I said softly. It's time. They didn't argue. They helped me pack up the remaining items, the good memories, the family heirlooms, the holiday decorations I couldn't part with. I donated old furniture, called the real estate agent, listed it within a week, and when the offers came in, I selected the one from a young couple with a baby on the way. Let it hold joy again. Let it hold someone else's new beginning. I signed the documents on a Wednesday and closed the door for the final time. That evening, I moved into a bright 2-bedroom condo on the edge of town. It had a balcony that overlooked a park, light that streamed across the hardwood floors in the morning, and a tiny extra room I converted into a studio. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't a symbol of status. It was freedom. My phone vibrated the first night. Richard, please just talk to me. I didn't reply. I gazed out at the stars from my new balcony and whispered into the night. You had your opportunity. Because the truth was, I had pleaded for years for attention, for affection, for kindness, and now that I was gone, he finally heard me. But I wasn't speaking to him anymore. I was speaking to myself. And for the first time, I was truly listening. I was unpacking the last box, the one labeled Carolyn's desk, full of old journals, pens, paper clips, and faded thank you notes. When I heard a knock, it was soft, hesitant, not like Richard's usual knock, not when he believed he owned the space behind the door. I knew it was him before I even peeked through the peephole. He stood there in a wrinkled blue shirt, holding nothing. His hands were empty. So was his face, stripped of arrogance, charm, everything he had ever used as a shield. Carolyn, he said when I opened the door. I didn't invite him inside. He didn't expect to be. I found your new place, he added, glancing at the number on the door. Emily told me. I asked her not to, but she thought you might want to hear me out. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. You shouldn't have come. I know. He appeared smaller than the last time I saw him, not in physical height, but in presence, as if he had been worn down. as if the world had finally caught up to him and started collecting its dues. He ran a hand through his hair, which was grayer than I remembered. I came to say, "I'm sorry." Silence. I was a coward, a selfish, oblivious, pathetic coward. Still, I said nothing. I didn't appreciate what I had, and I thought I could replace what I lost with something flashy and effortless. But the truth is, nothing I ever shared with anyone else came close to what I destroyed with you. I let his words hang there. I didn't soften, I didn't lean in, because while he had been tearing me down day after day, I had rebuilt myself. "I know I don't deserve anything from you," he continued. "Not forgiveness, not empathy. But I needed to face you. I needed to see your eyes and know you heard it." I finally spoke. "You departed a long time ago, Richard. This isn't about Cartagena or Maya or the hotel that didn't exist. This is about every silent meal, every disregarded moment, every time you looked past me as if I were inanimate furniture." He lowered his eyes. "I know, and I allowed you to," I continued. "I let you diminish me. I let myself vanish." He started to speak, but I stopped him. But not anymore. I stepped out onto the balcony and gestured to the view. Trees, children playing in the park, dogs barking somewhere in the distance. This is my domain now. My life. He looked at me. Truly looked at me. "You're radiant," he said. I nodded. "That's what happens when you stop nurturing dead relationships." He smiled faintly. It wasn't mocking. It was sad. Genuine. "I don't have a home," he said quietly. "That's not my concern anymore." He nodded, swallowed hard. "I'll leave now." I didn't prevent him. He walked down the hall slowly, as if he didn't know where to go next. And perhaps he truly didn't. I closed the door behind him. No tears came, no regrets, just a calm, steady tranquility. The kind you only experience when the past stops calling. There are mornings when the light streams in just right. And for a second, everything is still. No buzzing phones, no expectations, no underlying tension at a too-quiet breakfast table. Just the gentle breeze, the warmth, the aroma of fresh coffee drifting from the kitchen. I live for those mornings now. My name is still Carolyn Whitaker, but I've transformed in every significant way. After Richard left my doorstep that night, I didn't hear from him again. At least not directly. Emily said he was staying with a college friend across town, trying to get back on his feet. Daniel mentioned he had picked up part-time consulting work for small businesses, but neither of them pressured me. Not anymore. They understood the boundaries. They saw the woman I had become. And more importantly, they respected her. In the months since, I sold the last of our joint assets, finalized the separation of all legal and financial ties, and invested in something I never thought I'd possess again. Myself. I opened that online shop, Sketch and Soul. It's small, but it's mine. People order prints of my artwork, landscapes, abstract emotional pieces, scenes from memory. Each one embodies a piece of the quiet, powerful transformation that saved me. And once a week, I teach an art class at the local community center. Women attend, older, younger, some heartbroken, some simply weary, and we sit in a circle sketching, shading, sharing stories between pencil strokes. We don't always talk about what we've lost, but sometimes healing isn't loud. Sometimes it's a shared quiet among people who finally decided to choose themselves. I still walk through the park most mornings. There's an oak tree by the path with a bench beneath it. I sit there with a thermos of coffee and watch the joggers pass by. Children chase each other, dogs bark at squirrels, and the world continues, lighter, cleaner. One day, a letter arrived in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. But I recognized the writing. It was brief. "Carolyn, I hope you are happy. I hope you found peace. I never truly understood how much harm I caused until I had to sit with it in silence. And I finally comprehend that the quiet you gave me was more impactful than anything you could have spoken. I'm sorry for everything. And thank you for liberating me, too. Richard." I folded it neatly and slid it into the back of my sketch pad, not because I needed to keep it, but because it represented the final chapter, the conclusion of a story I'd never asked to write, but wrote nonetheless. A woman doesn't always receive her justice in courtrooms or public apologies. Sometimes, she finds it in the quiet choice to prioritize herself after decades of being everyone else's support. And when she finally releases the weight of what she was never meant to carry, something extraordinary occurs. She rises. I sit here now on my balcony, watching the sun disappear behind the trees, sketchbook on my lap, pencil in hand. And for the first time in my existence, I don't need anyone to see me, because I see myself, and I love the outlook. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and feel free to share your own story in the comments. Your perspective matters.